So, Ayinde, what do you want to talk about today?
This morning, my topic is kind of triggered by a conversation I had over the weekend. Mm-hmm. And it's not a broad topic per se. It's very specific. It's like using video in doing your annual reports. It's a discussion on that.
Oh, that's interesting. Video for annual reports. I wonder what that discussion was like. To get to that point, it probably was a very interesting discussion.
It's interesting, but when we get into it, I kind of lay out all the pre-thought and the triggers and so on. But what do you want to talk about this morning?
All right, I was thinking about several things. I landed upon 3 steps for more content engagement. Now, the problem with that title is that it doesn't really reflect what I'm going to talk about, but it's probably more of the hooky title format that will get people wanting to listen. So 3 steps for more content engagement. That's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to talk about something very specific when it comes to what you could do to get more content engagement. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds very interesting.
Yep. All right. So I'll run it first because I know you wanted to kind of stew in your topic a little more. So we'll give some room for that. So let me start. I want you to imagine.
Okay, I'm imagining.
I want you to imagine a scenario. Now, the scenario is probably a common scenario, and it's where you put out a piece of content and you think it's really good. You worked on it. You stayed within the structure. So you have a hook, you have a setup, you have a main message, and you have a call to action, which is generally how video is supposed to work generally. And you also stayed on topic. So you did a content strategy, and because you have a content strategy, you stayed on topic. Plus, on top of that, you have your 3 to 5 points laid out, really, really well laid out. But for some reason, people are not engaging with the content. Right? It may get 1 or 2 likes, but people are not commenting. People are not saving the post. And most of all, people are not sharing the content, because those are some of the strong signals that your content is good if people are sharing them, if they're commenting, etc. Of course, there can be many reasons for this, but one of the main reasons I've seen, especially in the corporate world, and when it comes to people who are coming from a background where they are in a corporate structure, and particularly from CEOs and executives, is that we make content for us to understand and not for the people who we want to consume the content. We make it for us and not for the people who we want to consume the content.
Yeah, I could see that being an easy mistake to make. I could definitely see that being something that you could easily just kind of fall into. You figure you're an expert in the industry and your thoughts are probably along the line of the thoughts of other people, probably even your customers, without really double checking and seeing, hey, am I my ideal customer? Because if you make content from your own perspective, that's a question you probably need to ask as a CEO, as a marketer, is, am I my own ideal customer? Maybe you're not. And so doing it from your perspective, I'm agreeing with you, can cause an issue.
Absolutely. And that is often not the case. You are often not your ideal customer. And I can understand if you are just starting in business, you don't really have a reference as yet until you get some customers that you can talk to. Or the wise thing to do is go and look at a business that is similar to your business and look at their customers and see what the customers are engaging with, and then mirror that content until you get your footing, until you figure out exactly what you should be doing. Because there is some validity in experimenting and testing things out, and it comes from you initially if you're the only person in the business, but also it comes from your interactions with your customers and really listening to them. If we make content that our exact customer can understand and can see themselves in, that is known as relatability. And there are many ways to increase the relatability of your content, including things like using stories, for example. But today I want to talk specifically about one aspect of being more relatable, which is how you use your language in your content, how you use language in your content. And to explore that, I want to look at something called the complexity trap. The complexity trap. What does that sound like it's going to be, I think?
It sounds like it's going to point towards, in particular, industry jargon. So in my house, we have a running joke about the nick.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly give the story and give the background of it. So the joke is about the nick. Did you turn the nick off? So I used to work at this company, and the IT department didn't cross two people. It's usually one or two persons, but they had the senior IT manager. And so this is back when I was in printing. So we were in the printing room, and we had an issue with our computers connecting to the RIP. Those of us in printing will remember what a raster image processor is, right?
Yes, yes.
So you know what the RIP is, the machine that kind of rasterizes all of your files so that you could print. So he comes to us and he's searching and he's doing his thing and he's doing his IT thing, and then he all of a sudden grandly announces the nick is bad. And everybody, all the other artists, even the manager, we looking at each other like, who's Nick? And he repeats it again, the nick is bad. And we're like, what's he talking about? Eventually we had to kind of squeeze out of him. What he meant was the network interface card is not working, which is basically the jack where you're putting your Ethernet cable is bad, which is what, I mean, if you said that the first time, we would have known exactly what he was talking about. So that has become an ongoing joke. Anytime something is not working or we need to explain something or we want to make fun of jargon, we say, you disconnect the nick.
So that story perfectly illustrates what happens and what we tend to do as people creating content, especially in the early days of making content. And sometimes we are our own worst enemy when it comes to creating content because we have the curse of knowledge. We have the curse of knowledge. And and that curse of knowledge often makes us forget what it's like not to be an expert at something, not to know something inside out. So we end up falling into the trap of using the industry language that we understand, industry jargon, but it's not the same language that our exact customer would necessarily use or understand. Right? And so we're going to talk about how you can escape that complexity trap. And you do that by simplifying your language. And we're going to look at 3 ways in which you can simplify your language or make some adjustments so that you don't fall into the complexity trap of these industry jargons and things that you would understand and that your exact customer wouldn't understand. So you'll be able to speak to them in a way that makes your content more relatable. And of course, after that, you'll get more engagement in different ways and it'll make your content more shareable. So we're going to look at that right now. Three things you can do to make your content more relatable by simplifying a language so you can escape the complexity trap. But let me start first of all by debunking the biggest myth in the midst of all this, right? Or the biggest myth in communication, particularly in content, is that big words does not mean better content. Big words does not mean better content. And the core philosophy is that we often feel the need, it feeds our pride and our ego. We often feel the need to sound academic or to sound smart. But it's much, much, much harder and much more impressive, I would say to me, to say smart things in a very normal way. Right. It's much more impressive and it's much more difficult. So people tend to default to the thing that they think makes them sound intelligent, smart, and academic, when in fact that is working against them in communicating the thing they want to communicate. So the goal is that today we are breaking down these 3 specific ways to strip away the complexity and the fluff so your message actually will land when you want it to land. Right. And let's start with tip number 1 to do that. Tip number 1, turn your big words into definitions. Instead of using one big word, you basically break it up into what the word means. So you say something and then thereafter you explain it. Or better yet, you don't say the big word at all. You just use the broken down definition of the word. So if you find yourself reaching for uncommon or multisyllabic words, just stop and ask yourself, would the definition of this word be clearer? Would the definition of this word be clearer? So the logic behind that is that when you use a big word, the listener's brain has to pause for a microsecond to translate it. If you use the definition instead, they stay in the flow of the conversation. So your content begins to be easier to digest. So instead of somebody hearing something that they don't understand, which you have to now figure out what this thing is, if you use something that is at a easier level of understanding, then it keeps them in the conversation. It keeps them engaged. It doesn't take them out of what you're saying. So a real world example of this is, suppose you are an interior designer, or you're somebody who does cleaning or organizes houses, and you say something like, we are decluttering the space. Instead of saying decluttering, try saying something like, we are going to clean up the space. And the reason why cleanup works better than decluttering is that cleanup is something that is more visceral. Everyone knows exactly what a space feels like when it's dirty and what it feels like when it's clean. So your audience may not be familiar with the concept of decluttering, because in order to understand decluttering, you'll have to understand what clutter is defined as, and then you have to understand the opposite of that. So the assumption is that while somebody may know the word decluttering, it's just better to say clean up your space, and that will make it easier to understand.
Yeah. Or maybe you could go in with actual examples of what it actually means to clean up or to declutter. So we are going to and add in that information at the end. So like give actual practical steps that people can or cannot take that reflect the point you want to make.
And also, that's such a good point, because, so for example, if you were going to use a word that means something, more than just talking about it, you then now show what that thing means. You walk people through the process of showing what that thing actually means, then it's even better. Because I will always say that showing is always better than saying, right? Show, don't tell. So if you have the opportunity to show something that communicates meaning, even without words, that's even better. So one level is saying the big word, the other level is saying the definition, and the other more useful level is demonstrating that or showing that actually in the video that you're creating. So if you're able to do that, then do it. But for the times when you can't do that, then break down the big word into the definition so that people will be able to understand, right? And that will help you communicate what you want to communicate even better. So that's tip number one. So let's talk about tip number two. And tip number two is something that I have had to learn over a long period of time. Every time I encounter, I'm scrolling through Instagram, well, not Instagram so much, particularly on places like LinkedIn and on Facebook, where you find some corporate videos and things from companies. You'll find when those companies send their people to talk, or the executives come to talk, they have a certain way about them. They have a certain cadence about them that feels very unusual. You wouldn't stand up with somebody or a friend that you have and have that conversation in the way that they're trying to communicate. So tip number two is talk like a friend. Talk like a friend. So the first one is simplify things, take your definitions, break them down. And the second one is to talk like a friend. So think about how you talk to a good friend in real life. Think about someone who you like to have a conversation with. In that conversation, you're not trying to impress anybody. It's somebody who you know. You're not trying to impress them with your vocabulary. You're just relaxing and sharing an idea. You're sharing a thought. You're sharing something that is important to you and also important to them, right? And so the shift that we need to make, or the shift in the vibe of what we need to communicate, is that when you record, imagine you are sitting across the table from someone that you trust. And if you're sitting across the table with someone you trust, you're not tense anymore. Your shoulders drop, your tone warms up, and you become much more relatable in that way. So it's not a stressful thing to have the conversation with the person. And here's what you have to do if you are having problems shifting your tone from what I would say is a cold, kind of matter-of-fact corporate tone into a more friendly tone. After you write the script, just read it out loud. Read it out aloud to yourself.
Right, okay.
If you stumble over a sentence or you feel like you're reading a speech, then it's not conversational enough. Because that is what tends to happen, is that people end up reading speeches instead of creating content. They end up just talking about things in a way as if they're addressing the UN or something like that. And content is not like that. Content is not. Those places where people read speeches and they get a rousing round of applause after, that is a very specific space with specific people And trust me, the people at home are probably not clapping. So you have to be very careful about how you communicate those things, that you don't want to be reading off facts, figures, and being robotic about it. You want to keep it conversational and be relaxed in the way you communicate.
Yeah. I mean, if you create content that is very formal sounding, I guess, one of the things that you do is that you remove the social away from the social media. And from what I'm hearing you saying, you have to make it more social. So you have to think about it like you're talking to a friend. You have to think about it like it's a simple engagement, a conversation, as opposed to a speech, which is very one way in its first instance, because you're kind of talking at somebody and not so much speaking with them. And a conversation is a kind of open two-way kind of thing. Even though you're creating content, you still create it in a way that it feels like a two-way conversation, unless like I'm just speaking at you and instructing you or trying to make myself sound laudable.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really, really good point, is that if it feels like you're speaking at someone, then it is probably the wrong tone, that it's not like a conversation. If it feels like when you make your content that somebody can reply to you and ask you questions and say so, because let me tell you, the conversation starts in the content, but it could end up in your DMs, or it could end up in the comments, because that's what you're doing when you're creating this content. You're inviting conversation. You want people to come in the comments and say something. You want people to answer the questions that you've asked, or you want people to ask you questions. And so it is, in fact, starting a conversation. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. And that's what engagement is. Engagement is a two-way street. Engagement is I say something to you and you saying something to me. And let me give you a really practical visual of that. When somebody is engaged to be married, they're not doing it by themselves. They're engaged with someone else.
Right.
So it's always...
well, these days, you never know.
You never know, people are being engaged with themselves. But traditionally, right?
You need two people to engage.
You need two people to engage. You need two people to engage in marriage. You need two people to engage in a conversation. And if you want to have engagement on your content, you're going to have to be thinking in twos instead of one, right? Keep it conversational. Think in twos. Think back and forth. So that is one of the ways that you could help adjust your content. And another tip on this, let me add another tip on this, is that, and this tip should have been obvious to a lot of people, but because of AI now, it should become even more obvious, which is that you just speak to your phone, use voice to text. And so for me personally, I often use voice to text to do drafting of scripts. I will speak naturally. So since you speak naturally with the AI, the written result is already in your human voice, is the way you would normally speak. And that bypasses the formal writer brain entirely. So it bypasses that whole thing of I have to be formal. Just have the conversation. And that is what AI is moving towards more and more, which is natural language. They're always asking about how can somebody naturally speak to this thing. It has to be more human. It has to be more human. So there's no reason for us to try and be more formal if all of the tools around us are trying to push us towards being more human in the way we communicate things. So if you want it to be more understanding, if you want it to be clearer, just make it more conversational. Yeah. So let's go on to the third tip. Right. And the third tip is a practical tip that most people will miss, depending, and particularly people from Trinidad, including myself, have this problem. So tip number 3 is slow it down. Just slow it down.
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah. I eat my own words often. So I start a sentence and interrupt myself, which people... There's a time way back in the days when I was working at media sales. I was in my early 20s, like 21 or 22. I was working with all the graphic designers in the graphic design department. And we had a guy he wasn't really our supervisor, but he was senior to us. His name was Junior. And one day he came and he asked us a question. And I responded to him so fast that he stopped in his tracks and he looked at me and like, he didn't understand what I said. Only at that moment I realized, I ate up all my words. And then he said something like, boy told man, we need a translator for you, boy. We need an interpreter for you or something like that, he said, which was just him saying that I don't understand what you're saying. You're talking too fast, which I was very, very guilty of. So over the past 20 how much years, I've been able to work on that in different stages to slow my speech down. So now it's easier for people to understand what I'm saying. Yeah. And just to note, there is no prize for finishing your explanation the fastest, right? The audience needs time to digest what you're saying.
I'm not sure if other people have the same problem I have, but I think I've had this problem since secondary school, maybe since primary school. When you have to stand up and make a point, I end up rushing to speak because I don't want to forget.
Oh.
So I don't know if I am the only one with a forgetful brain like that. Like you have this thought and you know it's, and this is the way it's worded, and you're trying to get it out before you actually forget the exact way you're trying to make this point. That happens to me a lot. So I don't know if other people have that particular issue, but you're right. Slowing it down is necessary. And it's something I'm working on doing, which is to slow down and have the correct intonations and pauses so that you have better engagement, you have better understanding, you could clarify your thoughts, and you don't kind of do the same thing you're saying, which is interrupt, which I just did. Interrupt one thing that you're saying with another thought that just came into your mind.
If anyone who's listening to this right now has that problem, let us know in the comments. If you have the problem of trying to get things out fast because you think you're going to forget what you're going to say, part of that is like you're nervous too, nervousness about what you have to say, so you rush through. Yeah. And over time, you get better at communicating, especially if you have to say things publicly or make comments publicly, which we often would have to do, or say things in a forum where there are people who you don't know. Even in front of people you know, sometimes you rush. So it's always a good thing to pace yourself. Let me give you some tips on how to make that better, right? So pacing is what I was going to say. Pacing as clarity. Don't rush through the how-to parts of what you're saying. Take your time, explain it properly, even if you feel pressured by forgetting, or you feel pressured by the crowd, or you feel pressured by the fact that you have to try and get this right. That could also bring you to a place where you don't take your time to do it. Another tip is that there's something called the power of the pause. Okay. So you emphasize your key points and then pause. Let the silence do the heavy lifting. Now, in terms of creating your content, afterwards, you could go cut out those big pauses and edit it to make the content actually tighter. But if for some reason you're recording and you have finished a point, you could just pause at wherever the full stop is in the sentence, and then you continue on. So part of my problem is that I always think I'm talking too fast.
Okay.
Which is a good thing. And then I go back and listen to it and I realize that years of training has made me speak a lot slower than I usually do. And you have to feel that pause or feel the clarity as the words cross your lips so that you don't try to explain things too fast either. And then there's something called vocal punctuation. Just remember where your commas and your full stops are. This is why English is so important. Knowing English is so important. This is why I support the Oxford comma, for all those who know what that is. So you have to know where your commas and your full stops are.
Well, hold on. We can't be committing the sins we're chastising people for. So you can't just drop Oxford comma and expect we all know what Oxford comma is. So you see, for those of us who know, well, some of us don't know, maybe.
Okay.
So what's the Oxford comma?
So the Oxford comma is the comma that is after a conjunction. So, a conjunction is supposed to be a natural pause. So like and, but, all those different things that connects one sentence to the next. So there's a big argument there's no need to have a comma because the conjunction implies the pause, but some people still put a comma after the conjunction, and that is called the Oxford comma. So so people often say there's no need for that. There's no need but people ignore conjunctions all the time. They do run-on sentences with buts and ands and all those different things in it. So it's always good to have a comma to tell people, okay, pause here, slow down. It's like an amber light. Pause here, slow down, and then you can continue on. Yeah. Let me add one more thing in this section, and then I will come down to the end. So a kind of a bonus tip on this whole thing is that if you are accustomed using jargon, then it's forms of a kind of a wall between you and your audience. So to better communicate, you need to turn what I would consider corporate speak back into human language. So, for example, some of the culprits inside a corporate speak are things like synergy, right? So that
synergy and other lies.
Synergy and other lies.
Yeah, I'm just looking around for the book. There's a book I read, a very good book by somebody most people wouldn't know because he's not one of those super high flying CEOs. But he wrote a book called Synergy and Other Lies. I thought I had it right here, but I probably have it on the bookshelf.
Okay, I didn't even know that. So that wasn't just something you were saying. It's actually a book called Synergy and Other Lies. So synergy, if you were saying synergy, you just say we work well together. If you're saying something like move the needle, just say this really makes a difference. Something like circle back. Let's talk about that later. It means something, but it doesn't add to your content by putting that in it. It makes you less human, makes you more corporate, and you don't really want to sound like that. Right. So the bottom line is this. The bottom line is clarity is kindness. When you simplify your language, you aren't just dumbing it down. You're opening the door for more people to enter into the conversation when you are clearer. And on a wider note, generally in the Western world, we adults tend to read at a certain level. And that is like around form 2 or 3. When you get to 13 or 14, most of your vocabulary is already formed, and most people don't go past that level. The average for adults is around there. And you have to make it easy enough for somebody of that level to understand what you're saying. And so keeping it at that level makes sense. It makes sense. If you're talking to a global audience, English might not be their first language, so keeping it at that level makes sense. And also, if people are doing things like watching it on a mobile phone, and they're often distracted, they're cooking, they're exercising, and you want to keep the language simple so that they get it on the first try. Yeah, so I'll stop there, and let's get into what you want to talk about today.
Yeah. I'll just before we move off that topic, I'll be interested to know if any of our viewers/listeners have any anecdotes or stories about jargon that they would like to share with us. So I give you all the nick. I'm on the lookout for some others. I also have as per. Certain people will get that one. That one is a very specific kind of corporate jargon. It's like you write in an email and you say, as per my last email.
Yeah, as per my last email. That's always interesting.
So, yeah. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. So 2 things happened that kind of started me thinking down this particular road. One of them, I was having a conversation with another graphic artist who's been a graphic artist for a long time. He's actually very proficient and very well known, very good for things like books and annual reports, which is what one of the parts of the conversation that got me thinking about annual reports. The other thing that happened, I can't really talk about too much because it's a project for a client and it's not out yet. It's not public yet. But it's related to annual reports. And I started thinking, now the conversation, so I'll tell you the guy's name. His name is Kelvin Thomas. You know Kelvin.
Mm-hmm.
So very good at annual reports. And we were talking about business and work. And so we usually have a conversation around AI and so on at some point in time or the other. And we were making the point that annual reports are one of those areas where AI can't get in just yet. Like it's hard to get an annual report done correctly and precisely, covering all the things you have to cover and letting AI do it. Because an annual report is more than just a design. And also it needs to be very specific to the brand. It needs to have statutory information inside there, regulated information inside of there. And so it's hard to say, well, let me just give that to Claude, or let me just give that to ChatGPT, which I hope nobody does, and get something that you could then just hand to the client. So he was agreeing, he was saying, although it may come to the point sometime in the future, and I guess because Claude does some good PowerPoints now, if you feed all the data into Claude, you could probably get back a starting point, at least a starting point, which is what all AI, well, most AI is going to be, right? Like a really good tool for you to start what you want to do. So anyway, we were talking about it as being not yet being taken over by AI. And so, of course, he was recently working on an annual report and that kind of thing. So that's the first part of the thought that I was having. Then the other part is with the client who is producing a video to go alongside their annual report. And I started thinking, while AI will not replace the graphic artist to do the annual report, I'm wondering if video could possibly replace the annual report in its current format altogether. Because the current format for the annual report is PDF written. And a big part of that is people treat it as something they have to do because of the law, because of regulations. And so the question I'm asking is, can we replace annual report PDFs with video? And if not, can we enhance annual reports with video, and what those enhancements might look like? So if you ask yourself, what's the point of an annual report? That's probably the first thing you'll ask yourself. It's like, why do we have to do an annual report? On a very basic level, it's a statutory requirement. So most financial institutions have to produce them by law. And you can tell the kind of approach like that in some instances, the way they're treated, the way the prominence they're given. Every year you have to produce your annual report. But in truth and in fact, the annual report is actually one of the biggest trust drivers for the organization. Because what you're doing is, in a very succinct and specific way, you're trying to communicate to certain audiences. So you're trying to communicate to investors and donors. So you're saying to your investors or your donors, depending on the type of organization you have, you're saying to them, your money was well used, and this is the proof, give us more money. So that's what you're using the annual report to do. Or you might be talking to your employees and you say, this is what we built together. Come, continue to build with us, continue to join and be envisioned with the future of the organization. And you kind of build that trust to move forward with the employees. Or you might be talking to your clients or partners, and this is what we said we would deliver. We've delivered, and continue being our clients, continue being our partners. And of course, particularly larger organizations have to talk to the general public. Some of them have to talk to government agencies. Some of them have to talk to NGOs. And so they want to communicate that, okay, we exist for a reason. This is what it looks like. And what you're actually doing with an annual report is producing a trust document that backs up everything that you said the year before. So when you look at it like that, you realize, oh, this is a very important opportunity to communicate. And the question you might ask yourself is, am I communicating in the best way? Yeah, so am I using the best tool to communicate? And I'll drop a little stat here for you. Viewers retain 95% of a message compared to just 10% of people who read the message. So you could possibly argue that doing a video annual report can produce 95% retention versus 10% retention when it's written. Now, if you see the role of a annual report to communicate and to build trust, then that statistic has to make sense to you. That statistic has to jump out at you, because you're not just doing it to say, well, okay, we've done it. So if 10% of people get it, it's okay. If you see it as, oh, I need to communicate, I need to build my brand, I need to build trust and prove trust, then you have to be worried about how many people actually are likely to retain the information inside of your annual report. Yeah.
So we have on Facebook, we have Kizzy asking a question. She's saying, when I think annual report, I think financials. How can you put that into video?
That's a really good question. I think the same way people think about financials, most people don't want the details. Now, you still have to do your financial report. So we have a company, so we do end of year finances all the time. But I would think our investors would be more interested in the highlights. And so that's one of the ways I would put that into video. Create a video around the highlights. And because that's what people want to hear anyway. They want to hear the big numbers. They want to hear the general direction. And that could certainly be put into a video. Yeah. Any other questions we have coming up there? Any thoughts you have so far, Juma?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as a trust document. I hadn't thought about the annual report as a trust document at all. Like, it kind of just it's kind of boring usually. It's like, all of these people in suits standing up, on a white background or however you want to do it. Every year you have to find a different way to make these same people look different. Right. Yeah. But I've never actually read through an annual report, but it's not for me. It's not for me. It's for the people who have financial investment in the business. And so I could see how that could be the first question on someone's mind. How do the figures that I see on paper, it seems like solid and unchangeable. Once it's printed, it's there. But if you get a video, maybe they could take down the video, somebody could edit it to say something else. It's a bit of a challenge to translate my brain from a document I could keep to something like that.
Well, you kind of identify one of the issues right there. You think the annual report is not for you because you may not be an investor. Well, what I just outlined is that you have many different audiences as a corporation, and you could possibly be an investor. And how am I using my annual report to talk to you? Right now, in the PDF form, is not speaking to you. As far as you're concerned, that's like a financial document for people who invested, and is not seen as a communication tool for more than just those audiences. So let me just kind of outline the core argument. I'm not saying I'm 100% right. This is a thinking process. This is a thought exercise.
You're thinking it through. Oh, by the way, Kizzy also says the majority of people look at the resolutions, but then there are those who inspect the details, just to put that in there.
You will always have those people who want to read the details. So I guess my argument is not completely replacing. Sometimes you say completely replace to make a point. And that's what I want to do. I want to make a point. But I don't think we will ever get to the place, primarily because it's a statutory legal requirement. I don't think people would move to the place where you eliminate it altogether. But I do think there's some value in considering how do we add in video, or how can we use video as a co-communicating tool. So let me just so I have seven real differences between video and PDFs and why video can be better. So the first one, it puts a human face on the numbers. So if you're recording the video, you're recording somebody actually delivering the annual report or delivering a portion of the annual report. So you're talking about your CEO, you're talking about your general manager, you're talking about your chairman, and they are the ones in the video. And what they can do is put that human face and communicate emotion and make it more human and less statutory. Yeah. So then somebody like Juma will see, this guy, I know him and I can engage with him, and what I believe him. His non-verbal cues are communicating to me, and it really helps to communicate in a real way. Those videos can also have like stories being told, anecdotes that makes it more relatable. Really, relating back to your previous discussion about making content more relatable. If you do it with video, you can make it more relatable. Yeah. Another point, the second point I would suggest is that it can communicate culture of the organization and not just performance. So the way your CEO speaks on camera, the confidence, warmth, conviction, factuality, somebody who's very factual and matter of fact, whatever is the nature of the CEO and therefore the culture of the company can be easily communicated with video and much, much more difficult to do in a PDF or any kind of printed document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a big one, the third one is a big one. The third one is that it makes complex information easier to understand. So Kizzy was making a good point about complex information. But a lot of people who don't understand financial reports. So I learned how to read financial reports in university. We actually did a course called financial management, where you learned about ratios and you learned about what different numbers made on the balance sheet. And so I had to learn how to read one of those things. General public doesn't really get it. They might look to see, okay, what's the revenue? But they don't know what that revenue to expenditure might mean. They don't know what that might mean over a 5-year period. So somebody explaining it through a video can actually make it less complex and easier to absorb. Yeah. So that's the third point. It can make complex information easier to absorb. So the fourth thing I would suggest is that it can be more shareable than a PDF. The tendency to share public videos is higher than to share PDFs. Because if you think about it, to share PDF, you have to email it. People are wary about emails and attachment in emails. Or maybe you have to send it through WhatsApp, which again, people might be wary about. But if you have it posted publicly as a video online, then the possibility of sharing that increases exponentially. Yeah, so people are more likely to share a video that lives somewhere online than to share a PDF.
Right. How about, I mean, okay, so Kissy made a point that I like. She said video can be used in addition to the written documents. How about like a hybrid approach to, this is what you're suggesting, that it doesn't replace everything, but you do a physical printed annual report, but then you do certain aspects of it as video because it's going to be more engaging in that way. And you take a hybrid approach to how the report is structured. I guess with the view of some point of reducing the print into a video, because like everything else in business, it's probably part of that is probably about cost. Instead of printing 1,300 page annual reports, if they just do one video and they could use it multiple times, then that might make business sense, you know? And that's often what gets people to do things if it's just financially more viable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I agree. As at least in the short term, it will be a hybrid kind of situation. And I could still see benefit coming out of that hybrid situation. So, yes, you could reduce the spending on the number of physical printed annual reports you do. But beyond the money, I think video just offers a better cost benefit ratio. I think the things that I'm outlining here kind of show that you can get more bang for buck using video if you really consider the reason behind doing the annual report. Yeah. And I can move on. So three more points. One, it signals to your organization that your organization, is forward thinking. Most everybody still do PDFs, and I'm happy that there are graphic artists out there who are getting that kind of work to do. But it can make you stand out in a sea of PDFs when you start producing either an alongside video or a replacement video altogether. So that's one of the things it could also do. It can create a certain level of emotional accountability. When you as the CEO sit there and make promises and talk about your successes, it makes you a little bit more accountable and makes the organization a little bit more accountable, which actually helps to build that whole trust issue that we've been talking about. Because if this guy, so like one of the things, probably the only reason I like Google search over AI search is because if you read an article you found on Google, it usually has somebody's name attached to it. Whereas AI is just stuff you don't know where it's from. And I always respect people when they put their names to a comment or they put their names to an article because it makes them accountable. So when you not only put in your name to something, but you put in your face to it and your voice, and people can see, okay, this is the CEO, Juma Bannister is promising this, then it makes you a little more accountable and more likely to build that trust because you have to deliver. Yeah. And the last point I would make is interesting that I'm saying this about printed things because I remember back in the days when I used to work in print and design and graphic design and so on. We always used to talk about magazines having a certain longevity. I think the ratio was one magazine would be read by 11 people. I think that was the metric we used to use back in the days. So that you cannot justify the advertising in magazines like that. So you would say if you did a magazine ad, the likelihood of 11 people for each print, each copy is likely. So let's say you want to sell advertising in a particular magazine, you print 11,000, you actually multiply that by 11 and say this is really what your distributorship is looking like in terms of eyeballs on your particular ad. But video actually lingers even more than magazines.
Well, video is infinite.
Exactly. So it works harder, it works longer. It will stick around either on your platforms, social media platforms, YouTube, etc. So it's not a one-time deliverable. People could always search this thing up and find it and engage with it and over a long period of time. So whereas the magazine metric might have been 11-1, the video social media metric might be closer to 100-1, and also for a much longer time.
Right.
So those are some of the reasons why I would suggest, and I'm just thinking, yeah. So I am open to input, but I'm thinking companies, corporations, when thinking about their annual reports, PDFs come to mind, yes, because you have to do your annual report. But think about, why am I producing this content? Am I doing this because I want to just fulfill my obligations, or can I use this as a communication tool? And if I can use it as a communication tool, then what is the best way to deliver that? And I am saying the best way to build trust and to communicate would be video over print.
Okay. All right. I accept that argument. I think, so it's Kizzy on fire this morning. Kizzy is saying that for accountability purposes, we need the hard copy and also for historical data capture. Well, video doesn't erase the data. The data that exists, I guess, is a collation of the data in that format, which is important. It's an interesting thought. And she also made the point that the companies have been doing hybrid video and print since COVID. It's an interesting point. It's a fair point that video is and can be used to build trust. And hearing your CEO talking on screen is a way that you can believe the thing even faster. But obviously, the whole thing surrounding that is that the company itself and the CEO as an individual also has to be trustworthy. And so that is more than just a function of the format, it's a function of what we spoke about in the last episode, is the function of the brand, personal brand as well as the company brand. So you'll find that even with the delivery format changing, it could amplify it in either way. It could amplify into more distrust, or it could amplify into more trust. And I think to find the balance as to whether that will work or not for you is a main thing when you're making a decision as to whether or not you want to turn your annual report into a video annual report, and I think that's important to consider.
Yeah, so I think my position remains there's real value to doing a video annual report, but I totally get the other side of the argument, because it's not like I neglected those thoughts. Because he's right in pointing out certain things. I know for a fact the statutory requirements will not change very easily. Those are not things that change too easily. But the discussion is designed to kind of prick us into the direction of considering what value can we get by pulling out certain aspects of the annual report and making it a video.
Yeah.
And how can we use video to better communicate some of the things that we so the annual report is carrying a lot of load. And maybe we should lighten the load of the annual report and be a little bit more effective. If our goal is to communicate and to build trust. If we want to do those two things, there's no dearth of evidence that shows that video is better doing those two things than text alone.
There's some aspects of video. Anyway, that's a whole other big discussion. I was going to talk about video versus format versus AI versus, there are lots of stuff, but it's a complex thing, and we could get into that. And of course, as you mentioned, the statutory requirements still remain. And some people just don't like change. They just simply don't like change. Beyond all the statutory requirements, some people just don't like change. It's hard to even get people to vote electronically in an AGM versus with paper,
Sure.
So human beings are hard to shift. So maybe in the generation ahead, if there's a forward-thinking CEO who can build the systems from the ground up, including using video as a communication tool, even for your annual reports, then it could probably work. Yeah.
Right.
So I know we had to wrap up now. So what did we learn today?
We learned that a PDF does a lot of good things and is necessary for an annual report, but maybe the time has come to look beyond the PDF. Yeah. And that might mean looking at videos, because what is happening with social media, we're being more and more encouraged and educated to be engaging. And you can't engage with a PDF because it's there. But when you have a video that you could then listen to and comment on and have discussion around, people are expecting that more and more. So to summarize what we learned, PDFs are good. Video could be better.
Yeah, I agree. And just to add to what we learned from what I spoke about, is that communicating in a way that is relatable requires you to speak to the audience using language that they understand. It requires you to slow down. It requires you to break down complex language into definitions. And the most brilliant people, the people in the world who communicate the best, are the ones who can explain complex ideas to people in a way that they will understand. And for us, on a practical level, it means keeping your language and your content at around the form 2 or 3 level. That's like a 13 or 14-year-old, 12, 13, 14, and focus on getting your message across as clearly as possible. And then the smart part will take care of itself thereafter. So that's how you use your language to make your content more engaging.
Okay.
Great. So thanks everyone for joining us today on this episode of It's Good to Relate. Kizzy is making one last comment here. She said, instead of only communicating, we need to educate our public to understand the information shared. I agree with that. Thank you, Kizzy, for being such a good engager with our content today. We do appreciate you. And for anyone else who has made comments who I have not seen yet, thank you as well. So thanks everyone for joining us again on It's Good to Relate. Don't forget to go to itsgoodtorelate.com. You can get all of the episodes there. We post them every single week. We're trying to put the actual finished episodes with the summaries on more platforms so you can get those there as well. Ayinde?
Yes, thank you all for joining us on It's Good to Relate podcast. Have a good day. Be safe.